from the first paragraph of the article that I was talking about. Actually, it's in The Guardian. You might want to go look at it. It's titled The Gravity of the Nigerian Situation. In the run up to the 2015 elections, the former governor of the central bank, Professor Charles Soludo, published what turned out to be a prophetic article. The article pointed out that regardless of who won the elections, the country appeared to be heading for troubled waters, and the discussion should be focused on how to get the country through the turbulent times and ultimately how to transform the economy into one that works for Nigerians. Alas, the elections came and went with the predicted economic prophecies fulfilled. I have with me in the studio economist Nonso Obikili with us in the studio. Good morning, Nonso.
Good morning, Tunji.
Great to be here with you in the studio. Nonso is basically an economist affiliate with a lot of things. He's also a columnist in the Guardian. We have a small affiliation with the Guardian, so you might notice why I'm talking about the Guardian a bit.
Okay.
So yes, Nonso is here with us in the studio. But now, I want to talk about this. Professor Chukwuma Soludo, one of my most favorite economists in Nigeria. I have three. He's one of the most favorite. What do you think were his thoughts in predicting what he did in terms of the fact that whoever won between the PDP, the APC, whatever party, we had troubled times ahead of us?
Right. So the signs were already there before the elections. We had begun to see the crude oil price fall.
Yeah.
It was still in the 60s, I think, at that time, but it was falling already. We already knew that the reserves had been under pressure for a while since Sanusi was there, and we already knew that extra crude account was basically drained.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question was, if the trend continues, the economy will be heading for difficult times, and what were we going to do about it? And I think at that point in time, no candidate was really talking about how they would deal with
the economy.
It was all about, I think, Boko Haram and security and other political things. And as it turned out, the crude oil price did crash, and we did head for the cliff.
I remember almost every economist I knew was saying the same thing Professor Soludo was saying, but he was one of the people that articulated it in an article, and it turned out to be exactly true. What is the reality now? Now, today, inflation looks to be going down. GDP has slowed down slightly in one quarter. Still weak, but slowed down. Unemployment going up. So the metrics kind of look, you can paint it either ways you want. If you want to paint it the glass looks half full. If you want to paint it from this angle, you can emphasize on the inflation going down consecutively. You can paint the metrics of foreign reserves going up. You can paint the fact that dollar naira prices has been stable to some extent. Some people will point you to the 50 kobo gain on the parallel market. But what is the reality on the ground now?
So I think it's important to take context into account, and I'm going to go back to the 80s just because it's Nigeria and it's a good example. So in the 80s, we kind of had the same scenario. We had an oil price crash. We had a change of government. We had adjustment programs. But we eventually had about 20 years of growth hovering around zero. Now think about it. Population growth was growing at somewhere around 3% then. So growth around zero meant Nigeria was getting poorer every single year. In economics, you call it the lost decades for Nigeria because nothing basically happened. You basically had a generation who lost out.
True.
And now we're kind of in the same scenario. Right, we've had an oil price crash. We've kind of recovered, but growth has started hovering around zero. If you strip out the crude oil sector, we're still at zero growth. And our population is still growing at 2.9%.
Yeah.
So we're getting poorer and poorer each year. As time goes on. And so the question is, first of all, how do you get growth back?
Which, of course, is where we're going to get to.
Yeah, because it's not a given that if we do nothing, we would automatically jump back to the 6-7%.
But we basically did nothing to get us out of this recession. Crude oil just rebounded, and then we were back in. So that seems like a working prototype.
Well, so the crude oil sector has rebounded.
Yes,
but the rest of the economy hasn't.
Okay,
right, and the crude oil sector notoriously employs very few people. And I mean, even though it has a big impact on the Nigerian economy from the FX side and from the government side, in terms of the actual daily lives of people, the impact is very, very minimal. Very, very minimal. Right? And so if you have the rest of the economy that's growing at 0% or thereabouts, then it's a struggle. And the way to observe that would be to look at what's happening to unemployment, what's happening to poverty. Those two are still heading in the wrong direction. We know unemployment because we actually measure it. Poverty, we're not so sure because we haven't measured it officially since 2010.
So one of the things that economists are, I want to say notorious for doing is predicting the future, and that is because I want to believe it is because, okay, I can't say I want to believe. I know it's because there's always that correlation between what has happened in the past, what is happening now, and what will happen in the future. So, looking into the nearest future and the next, let's just put a time cap of 8 years. Going with what we're doing now, the reforms, the kind of spending, the borrowing patterns, the focus on health patterns, the focus on infrastructure patterns. Where do you think we're headed?
Well, let me just first defend economists.
Okay.
And say no one can predict the future.
Okay.
Nobody.
Yeah.
The future is unknown.
Yeah.
But we can make calculated guesses, knowing that you could be wrong or you could be closer or further from the truth.
Yeah.
Like if you think of the stock market, for example, you know the price of a particular stock, if it's 30 naira today, it probably will not crash to zero tomorrow. And you can guess that with a certainty.
Yeah.
But you can't say if it will be 31 or 29.
Exactly.
Or,
Exactly.
So you can make a calculated guess. Now the IMF made a projection that over the next 8 years, Nigeria's economy would grow slower than population growth, which, again, no one can predict the future to that kind of accuracy, especially 8 years out. But the mere fact that it's a projection is scary.
That is scary.
Right? What that means
by
is
the way, City of Lagos is population growth is at 2.5%.
2.5, 2.9.
2.9%. So that means we will be growing at a GDP growth of right under that figure. It must be clear that we need to be growing above that, at least at about 7%, to at least have some sort of impact to be able to carry along our growing population and the economy. So you were saying IMF believes we could be growing under that.
Under that for the next 8 years.
Wow.
Which is bad. It's really bad. And for context, in the next 3 years, we have about 20 million Nigerians who enter the labor force. That's more than some countries. We need to generate 5 million jobs every year just to
be able to not
increase unemployment as it is today, and it's already really high. So there's a big challenge that a lot of politicians are not kind of appreciating. There's a kind of ignorance about the depth of the hole that we need to dig ourselves out of.
I want to read this part from your article. It says, according to a report by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, 53% of the people in Nigeria were living in poverty, with another 18% vulnerable to poverty. This study used data from 2013 before the recent recession, so the current numbers are likely to be higher. According to the World Poverty Clock, Nigeria is set to become the world poverty capital this year. That is the country with the largest number of people living in poverty. And he ends that particular paragraph with saying, "Dear politician, how are you going to tackle poverty?" And I ask you that same question. How do you think we can tackle poverty?
It's a very complicated question. Right? But if I have to use one sentence to explain how we can try to do that, we need to start participating in the global economy. And that's something we just don't do. The woman from AfriInvest was here, was talking just a few minutes ago about our non-oil exports. I mean, she said it's 24%, but if you ship out natural gas, it's actually a lot less. So crude oil is 75-ish. Natural gas is about another 10. The rest is, random products. And even if you look at that, I think the top 5 is crude oil, natural gas, then raw cocoa, then raw cashew nuts.
Emphasis on raw.
Emphasis on raw, then raw sesame seeds. So we are, even if you look at what we're exporting, it's basic agricultural products. We're not participating in the global economy at all. And that's where the focus needs to be. I mean, it's the damning export.
So, because if you look at it, what we're basically doing by even exporting some of those raw materials is we're exporting jobs. Because if you send cocoa to wherever, Switzerland or wherever it is, and those people there refine it, there are people creating jobs there. And when you could have done it here. But in the context, let's because I want to, I don't want to paint a necessarily gloomy picture, although it looks gloomy. I mean, we can't see the trajectory. We can't see that we're not investing in education enough. We can't see that we're not investing in healthcare enough. We can see that the housing deficit is increasing. We can see that the unemployment numbers are growing rapidly, especially the fact that our labor force seems to be expanding at a very aggressive rate, which of course should be an exciting thing for any economy that is prepared. But what are the low-hanging fruits? What are those things that, say, a politician can tackle in 4 years? Because, I mean, we must realize and must accept to ourselves that our politicians think in 4-year cycles, which, of course, was shocking to me when I read the story of Governor Obaseki, who was trying to plant cocoa trees and rubber trees. And I was like, okay, good, long-term thinking, but what if the next guy comes and says, we don't like this, we want to build skyscrapers here, and then pulls everything down? What are the low-hanging fruits that a Nigerian economy, Nigerian government can come in, look at and say, we will do this in 4 years and improve the lot of Nigerians, and they'll be able to feel a little bit better within that 4-year period?
Okay. So, I mean, I hate to use this phrase, but restructuring is not just general restructuring, but restructuring in the context of opening people's possibilities to participating in the global economy.
Okay.
So one of the things we have problems with is infrastructure, ports, roads, airports, and all those are still kind of dominated by the federal government.
True.
Right? But if the rest of the country outside Lagos is to make any kind of headway, they're going to need to have access to the rest of the world. So what we need is a kind of change in the way we structure our economy so that people can participate with the rest of the world. So think about ports, for example. If you're trying to set up a business that imports cotton, transforms it to jeans, and exports it, you can't do that outside Lagos, right? Because Lagos is the only place with a functioning port.
True.
And the road network isn't very efficient to allow you to do that. So if you're a politician who is trying to make a difference, to promote those kind of businesses, the first thing you can do is to say, well, anybody can build a port if you have the money, right? It doesn't have to be the federal government. I mean, you still need customs, you still need all that, but anybody can build a port. And importantly, anybody can export through anywhere. So one of the problems we have now is that we have this dichotomy between exporting by sea and exporting by land, right? So exports by land is mostly deemed illegal.
Yeah.
All right,
Naturally.
trade by land is mostly deemed illegal.
Yeah.
But if you think of a business in somewhere like Calabar, it might be easier to go through Cameroon than to start to move all your stuff to Lagos.
To Lagos, yeah.
If you're in Sokoto, for example, it might be easier to ship your stuff through Niger Republic and down through Benin to Cotonou and to try to go through Nigeria, through all the transportation wahala. So we need to start to think like that. Think about what the point is. The point is for states to have access to the rest of the world. And the easiest way to do that is not necessarily through Lagos.
True.
So that's one thing that a politician can do in 4 years. And that's something that is not really about money. It's more about politics, right? It's more about politics of resolve, of getting people together to think about how you make these kind of decisions and how you change kind of laws.
I read former CBN Deputy Governor's book, Kingsley Moghalu, Build, Innovate and Grow. And one particular thing he talks in that book about is the world view. He talks about it extensively in both his books, but he emphasized it more in this new book, talking about the world view. And his belief is that Nigerians have to have or Nigerian economics needs to have a global picture. What are we planning to do? And it gives examples of some nations. China decided what they wanted to be in the next 100 years and decided to work towards it. Brazil decided what they wanted to be. Singapore decided what they wanted to be. Does Nigeria have a foreign policy stance or a economic awareness of what we are trying to become? If we don't, which I don't think we do, what do you think it should be?
Well, I think it's something that you discover, right? It's not something that you can say in advance, this is what we want to be, and then be it. I think it's something that you have to allow people the freedom to investigate, to discover what it is that works for Nigeria, right? What it is that works for us. And it doesn't have to be the same for all Nigeria. It could be one thing for one part, it could be another thing for another part. But it's something that you need people to discover by themselves. If you try to predict what China would be in 1960, in 2000, you would probably be wrong.
You'd probably be wrong.
If you try to predict what South Korea would be in 1950, in 2000, you would probably be wrong. If you try to predict what France would be, you'd probably be wrong.
Particularly India, I would have predicted a large amount of poverty escalating. In fact, I would have predicted that they would have been miles behind Nigeria right now.
Yeah. So like I said in the beginning, no one can predict the future. But if you can't predict the future, then what do? You need freedom for people to try different things. People are trying different things, trying different options. You increase the likelihood that one of those things will work and become successful, and everybody else can learn from that. So I think that's where we need to go. We need to move away from this focus on our domestic economy and produce what we eat and grow what we consume, and policies that specify you must do rice, you must do.
So what you're saying is that we should just look for our best strengths and focus on that.
We need to give people freedom to choose what to do and learn what works.
All right. So we've been talking about fiscal policy and issues now, mostly down to the executive. Let's talk about the monetary policy end of things, particularly the purview of the CBN. Do you think we have the right monetary policy stance? I remember asking Dr. Soludo himself a couple of months ago, and I was saying the trajectory that, because he opened the first. Was it the first, or I think it was a WDAS. Or was it RDAS he instituted when he was in office, and some of the things he did around the dollar exchange. He started the recapitalization of the banking sector, pretty much created the idea behind AMCON and the rest. And I said, what were his thoughts then? And if we had followed it then, where did he think Nigeria would be now, monetary-wise? And of course, at that point, everybody would give a glowing example of themselves. And his thoughts were, of course, the naira would be the standout currency in Africa, at least, and it would be the go-to currency in Africa. Monetary policy-wise, where we are right now and the trajectory we're going towards, where do you think we're going? Because I'm just looking into the future. Where are we going?
So I'm going to try to explain it this way. So the goal of monetary policy is to guarantee stability for the long term. But a lot of people misunderstand what stability means. Stability does not mean everything is fixed at a particular price. Point.
Yeah.
Stability means there are no big shocks and there are no expectations of a big shock. So it doesn't mean your exchange rate is at 361 for 4 years. That's not what stability means. Stability means there's no expectation of a rapid jump in exchange rates.
That means it won't go from 360 to 700.
Right. It won't go from 360 to 700 overnight.
Yeah.
It won't go from 250 to 200 overnight. There will be no surprises.
There will be no surprises.
So from that perspective, our monetary policy is kind of not targeting stability. Right? It's targeting fixed prices, which isn't a good long-term strategy. I think we need to try to move away from that towards more flexibility. I'm not saying we should go floating or anything, but we need more flexibility. And that's one thing Soludo did. During Soludo's tenure, you would never see any fixed exchange rate. And that's part partly because of the RDAS. It was a market that was allowed to move up, down,
but
depending on. There was still some interventions, of course, because crude oil is still a major export and it's still very volatile. There's still some interventions, but the target wasn't any particular currency. It was to target a value that made things balance. As we say, it's target a real effective exchange rate. And that was the target. And during that period, even though we had shocks, we didn't really see any rapid movements in currency. And so that's where our monetary policy needs to move towards targeting stability, which isn't about fixed prices, but it's about the absence of shocks.
But we're not looking at that, right? And the CBN seems to be determined to keep the band within certain figures. So much so that there was a I don't know if to say there was an instruction given to BDCs of recent to, okay, you have you now have a 3 naira window which band which you can operate in, but make sure you do not leave that window. That doesn't seem in tandem with trying to keep stability. You're trying to say, hey, do it like this or else. What do you think foreign investors hear when they hear things like that?
Well, so if you're a foreign investor, then you know that at some point in the future you would have to adjust.
Pull out.
Right? It's inevitable. If you have to guess what exchange rate the naira would be in, let's say, 2025, you know it won't be 361. So the question is, how do you get to that adjustment? So the foreign investor, you say, well, as long as it doesn't happen today, I can still come in, do my business, and pull out.
Yeah.
Come in, do my business, and pull out. But if you're a long-term investor, you can't take that risk, right? If you're investing in fixed assets, if you're doing like a foreign direct investment, you can't take that long-term risk because you know there will be shocks at some point in the future. So this stability, in quotes, it's fine for short-term investors. It's fine for PFI flows. They're all happy with that because as long as you can exit before the shock happens, then you're fine. And if reserves are going up, then you can guess, okay, the shock won't happen anytime soon, so we're fine. But in terms of long-term stability, in terms of long-term investment, it's not very ideal. The best thing for long-term investment is for people to predict the future long-term, at least within a particular range, or at least have instruments to hedge their long-term risks.
Do you think that we should adopt these swaps as a big-time policy? Because it seemed to be exciting Nigerians that we've swapped a few dollars with China. Maybe this will give the people more things to cheer about. So tomorrow we do a swap with Japan, and then we do a swap with Germany. Everybody we're trading with, and we just do swaps and continue to do swaps. Do you think, because we've gone extensively into what the swap is, do you think it's a long-term strategy that will work for us?
No, because swaps are one-time things. You do it once, and then you can renew it every year, every 3 years, I guess, for the Chinese one. But then that's it. It's a stock, not a flow, as we say. So once you run out of countries to swaps with, then what? And I mean, the swaps are good. They reduce transaction costs.
Yeah.
But if you structure that if you look at that in terms of our economy, our real economy, where we export very little, then they kind of tilt things in favor of the people who import things. So they're the ones who make transactions in renminbi.
Yeah.
Renminbi. I mean, it's good. It's not a bad policy. It's a good policy to make your currency as convertible as possible with every other currency. That's very good. But I think we're overemphasizing the impacts.
So if I'm going to go away with anything we've discussed here, it's you saying that we need to be involved in global economy. We need to be involved in global trade. We need to actively participate in global trade, where it is at the point where Nigeria can be responsible for contributing something the world itself consumes outside resources. Is that it?
Outside resources.
Outside resources.
Crude oil is the crude oil era is kind of coming to an end, and even while it's here, it doesn't employ people, and that's the big problem. Crude oil does not employ people.
Yeah,
it's a very capital-intensive industry, and so crude oil sector does not have the capacity to pull the millions of Nigerians that we need to be pulled out of poverty. It just doesn't. And just to not sound like a pessimist, I mean, every country at some point in their history
went through this,
thought everything is hopeless. What can we do? We have no hope. But somehow
they were able to find a way.
So it's not like we're in a hopeless case.
It's just we need to think
but
through
we need to start to think about how we're going to get out of this. And I think that's why, it should be at the front of the discussion during elections.
And not put to the back
like the last time. People need to come and tell us what your opinion is, how you think you're going to try to do this. And, let's hear it at least.
If you do not understand the economy, maybe you should not be leading Nigeria. Or at least be prepared to listen to people who know how to lead the economy. I think that's my thoughts. Thank you very much, Nonso Obikili, for being with us on the show. Nonso is an economist, also a columnist with The Guardian. You might want to go and pick up his article in The Guardian. I think it's online if you can't find it at the newsstands right now. It's online, so you might just want to pick it up and read through some of the questions, because the article was more about questions rather than anything. Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Nonso, for being with us on the show. City of Lagos, look at your timepiece. It is 1 minute after 10 on a profitable Thursday. Do go out and be profitable.